My name is Michael Mostyn, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for B'nai B'rith Canada. First of all, we'd like to thank the Canadian Jewish war vets and Norm Gardner, its president, for working together with us in unison to bring this very, very important Remembrance Day ceremony to all of us. There is participation from all the way across Canada. We have some incredible speakers telling stories of valor and remembering the contributions of our fallen soldiers, as well as those who contributed to the war effort to defeat the Nazis in World War II. Not just the Nazis, because of course the Jewish contribution to the Canadian military has been throughout all of the conflicts that Canada has faced over these past many years and even into the present time. We will hear stories about anti-Semitism that existed at the time of World War II in the military that made it hard for those who wanted to contribute to the war effort, who wanted to contribute to the defeat of the Nazis that were menacing against the entire human race. And yet there was difficulties in some young men and women joining the military at that time. Of course, these are different times, and Jews, just as all minority and diverse populations in Canada, are now welcome in the military. But it is important to remember and to remember everything. For example, it was very difficult in World War II for Jews to enlist in the Navy, although by all accounts, both the Air Force and the ground forces were very welcoming to Jews and other minority groups. In fact, I will be speaking a little bit later about a Jewish contribution to improve diversity within the armed forces, particularly within the Air Cadets and the Air Force. We'd like to thank all of you who are watching here at home today. Unfortunately, this is a year in 2020 when we cannot come together and properly commemorate all of our soldiers and to commemorate the events of World War II and all of the wars that Canada has participated in. We hope that this will once again become a physical event in the future, but we are glad that we had this opportunity to partner with the Canadian Jewish war vets to bring this program to a broader population, to expand this across Canada. And we hope that this is something that we can grow together between our organizations and for the benefit of the greater Jewish community over the years. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Norman Gardner, and I'm the Post Commander for the Jewish War Veterans of Canada. I'd like to thank you for joining my board and members and along with B'nai B'rith in bringing the ceremony to you today. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we've had to change the methods by which we are bringing the service together. But I hope that it is meaningful to you, because Remembrance Day is a day that we have to remember those individuals who served this country in peace and war by their enlisting in the military. I would like to point out that 39% of all the Jewish males in the Canadian and Canada at the time of the Second World War served in the armed forces. The Jewish contribution was the highest one of any ethnic group in the country at the time. And over 400 Canadians perished during the Second World War while in service for Canada. In order to remember and honor those veterans, we should know who some of them were. Many of you had parents or grandparents that served in the armed forces, and there are some who didn't. But for all of you, I'd like you to know that we are going to commemorate the service of some of these individuals here today, and I'd like to thank you for being with us and learning a little bit about their heroic contribution, their sacrifice and dedication that helped make it possible for us to live in freedom as we do today. Thank you for joining us.
Love in all thy sons command, kach tomras paye des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
El male rachamim shochen bameromim habetzei menucha nechona lekanfei ashchina memachalot kedoshim udochoreim kezohar akyam asirim et nishmot chayalei tzva hagana leCanada שעזבו משפחתם ובתיהם ועלו להילחם ביבשה, באוויר ובים, ונפלו מות גיבורים בהגנת מדינתם. בחבורה שאנו מתפללים ויד אזכרת נשמותיכם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסירם בסדר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרו בצרור החיים את נשמותיכם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיכם ונאמר אמן.
Guard! Halt! Halt.
At this time, I would like to have you join me in commemorating the 2 minutes of silence for the fallen.
the mourner's Kaddish. Comfort, we pray, all who mourn. Give them strength in their sorrow and sustain their faith. In tribute to our departed, may our lives be consecrated to your service. In solemn testimony to that unbroken faith which links the generations one to another. Those who mourn now rise to sanctify your holy name. Please join me. Itgadal ve'itgadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma diberach chirutei ve'yamlich malchutei. B'chai echon u'v'yom echon ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מבורך לעלם ולעלמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, ואמירם בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום ממרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ויאמרו אמן.
Veterans Week is a chance for all of us to remember those who have served Canada in uniform for more than a century. It's a time to reflect on what it takes to leave your family and community behind in times of war or peace, to step in harm's way in service of others. And this year, as we mark 75 years since the end of the Second World War, we're reminded of the more than 1 million Canadians and Newfoundlanders who helped secure that hard-won peace. Theirs is a legacy of ordinary folk who stepped forward to do their part in the face of enormous challenge, and I hope we can all remember it at a time like this. So this Veterans Week, take a minute to remember and to say thank you to our fallen, our veterans, and all of those who wear the uniform today, lest we forget.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and especially veterans, my name is Aaron O'Toole. I'm the new leader of Canada's Conservatives and the leader of the official opposition in Ottawa. On this Remembrance Day, it's my honor as a parliamentarian, but also as a veteran myself, to celebrate and thank our veterans for their remarkable legacy of service in Canada, and of course, especially Canada's Jewish war veterans. These men and women served valiantly during the First and Second World Wars, the Korean War, many other missions, including Afghanistan. Many of these veterans also served in Israel. They continue to serve today. I want to thank them for their strength, bravery, and sacrifice in fighting for what is right, fighting for our values and our allies around the world. From the smallest towns to the biggest cities, Jewish Canadians answered the call of service, and they continue to do that today. Historically, they also did it at times of high levels of anti-Semitism. So I want to recognize on Remembrance Day the remarkable legacy of service. In the House of Commons a few years ago, I was proud to rise as a Conservative and thank former Liberal Cabinet Minister Barney Danson for his remarkable service in the Second World War. All parliamentarians, and indeed all Canadians, are extremely proud of the legacy of freedom that our veterans, including our Jewish war veterans, have provided. Today, we remember and honor them. Today, we say, lest we forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and humbled to be with you today. Today we pause to honor the fallen. We pay tribute to their heroism, their courage, and their sheer determination. We remember their lives as sacred chapters in the Jewish people's redemptive history. Their sacrifice will forever be a beacon in our ongoing struggle to defend the Jewish people and the State of Israel. All across Europe, Jewish communities were razed to the ground, their families separated, and their lives were either taken or destroyed. We remember when darkness befell millions of people. We remember those who were mercilessly murdered during the Holocaust. And we remember the survivors. We find strength in their presence and derive courage from their stories. From Hong Kong to Dieppe, or Tona to D-Day, we remember the 17,000 Canadian Jewish men and women who put their lives on the line in pursuit of peace and freedom for the victims of the horrific atrocities. We remember the dedication and commitment of all Canadians, Christians, Muslims, First Nations, all who fought for the safety and justice of the victims of World War II. We remember forever, and we hold dear to our hearts all those who sacrificed their lives in the fight for a better world. On this Remembrance Day, may we pause and reflect on all that was lost in the pursuit of peace, freedom, and independence. May their memory forever be a blessing.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of your Remembrance Day and Veterans Week ceremonies. Remembrance Day for me is about honoring the memory of all military personnel who came before us. Thanks to their heroism and selflessness, we live in a free and democratic country. This year, we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War by paying homage to those valiant Canadians who fought and fell to defend the freedom and livelihood of our allies in Europe, Africa, Asia, and beyond. While nearly 5,000 Jewish Canadians participated in Canada's World War I efforts, a little over 17,000 Jewish Canadians enrolled and actively participated in World War II, with approximately 6,000 in the RCAF and 10,000 in the Canadian Army. Think about that. With a Jewish population of almost 120,000 in Canada at the time, more than 17,000 contributed directly to the war efforts. That's 15% of the entire Jewish population, or 39% of all eligible military-age Jewish men in Canada. Several wonderful books have been written, along with many excellent sources available on the internet, which delve into the specific situations and stories of thousands of Jewish Canadians who fought, including the almost 500 Jewish Canadians who made the ultimate sacrifice never to return home. As a community, we must be grateful for them and for all Canadians who contributed and sacrificed during the Great Wars. Each year when we come together in communities across our country, we are reminded that these veterans, men and women, are dwindling in number. Where once many were in attendance at Remembrance Day ceremonies, now there are few, and to hear their stories firsthand is becoming less and less possible. In the military, we have a saying that if you hear something mentioned many times, you're actually meant to do something about it. And with that in mind, I'm reminded that the word zecher, to remember, is mentioned more than 200 times in the Tanakh, more than any other word in the Bible, save God's own name. If we apply the military rule, which by the way is very much in line with the teachings of our Talmudic sages, we are meant to do something about remembering. While listening is important, we are also to remember by keeping those memories alive, by sharing their stories, and by being guided by their sense of duty, commitment, love of country, and of freedom in general. On Remembrance Day, we also pay tribute to veterans of the Korean and Afghanistan wars, and the many who returned carrying the consequences of the war with them. Haunting memories of their wartime experiences left many with long-term psychological, emotional, or physical wounds. Of course, not all military operations are confined to foreign soil, nor are they limited to the past. Today, Canadian Armed Forces members continue to risk their own health and safety to protect others. While many continue to be deployed overseas on United Nations and NATO missions, others serve here at home. Steadfast service to our country is the common link that ties today's military members with those that came before us, so that whatever and whenever the need, Canadians can count on us to keep them and our country safe, just as our veterans did. That's something we must never forget, and why it's so important that we recognize Canadian veterans for their unimaginable heroism and great sacrifices. At the going down of the sun and at its rising, we will remember them.
I'm Tom Irvin, Dominion President of the Royal Canadian Legion. Thank you for taking the time to stop and thank our veterans during this period of remembrance. It is the year of the pandemic, and that has meant smaller public commemorations or none at all. I thank you for joining this virtual homage. Whether at home or as part of a public gathering on November the 11th, we will remember all our veterans in our hearts. At this time of the year, we pay respects to the fallen men and women who have died for our country. We honor those still serving in the Canadian Forces and the RCMP. They are the people who serve in the areas of conflict, in peace operations, or on humanitarian missions. This year, we also pay tribute to those who served in the Second World War. This is the 75th anniversary of the end of that war. On behalf of the Royal Canadian Legion, thank you for wearing a poppy. Thank you for your donations. Because of you, our 1,380 branches can support our veterans throughout the year, from emergency funding to programs that benefit their well-being. Thank you for taking 2 minutes of silence on November the 11th to salute our veterans and to thank them for our freedom. We will remember them, lest we forget.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Ellen Bessner. Ellen Bessner is our guest speaker today. Ellen is a journalist. She is the author of the book Double Threat, which goes through the history of many individuals in the Jewish community who served in the armed forces of Canada over the years. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ellen Bessner.
Honored guests, honored veterans, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ellen Bessner, a journalist and the author of Double Threat, the book which tells the stories of the 17,000 Canadians of Jewish faith who served in World War II. I'm honored to be speaking with you today from here, the Jewish War Memorial section of Mount Sinai Cemetery in Toronto, as we mark a Remembrance Day unlike any other, as the world struggles with the COVID-19 pandemic and no clear sign when and how it will end. It's eerily reminiscent of the time in the late 1930s when the Second World War broke out, and Canada's Jewish population mobilized to fight for freedom and democracy and against hatred and bigotry and totalitarianism. They went to fight for king and country, but also to save their own people from Hitler's final solution. For the young Jewish teenagers of those days, the 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, they had to make a hard choice. Do they leave behind their family, their friends, their school, and their jobs for an uncertain fate? The Canadian Jewish personnel who went to war faced a similar risk as their non-Jewish comrades in arms, the risk of being killed on the battlefield. But for the Jewish personnel, their risk was a great personal risk because had they been captured by the Nazis or the enemy and their Jewish identities were discovered, their fate would be very dark indeed. They also faced widespread anti-Semitism at home, in the ranks, and on the battlefield. All of these challenges they met with bravery and courage. They fought in all the major battles, from Dunkirk to D-Day, on land, at sea, and in the air. You may not know that about 200 Canadians of Jewish faith were awarded bravery medals, like Sidney Shulamson of Montreal. He was Canada's highest-scoring Jewish Air Force ace. He shot down 7 German planes. He sank 12 or 13 German ships, and yet he was never promoted past the rank of flight lieutenant, which is captain. He also won 2 medals, the DFC and the DSO. Men like Ben Dunkelman, who nearly didn't even get into the war, also won 2 medals. Dunkelman enlisted in the Canadian Navy, but he was never called for 9 months until one of his friends told him that Jews were not welcome in the Canadian Navy as officers, despite the fact that he owned and his family owned Tip Top Tailors. He had gone to Upper Canada College and also knew how to sail. He owned his own yacht. So he eventually joined the Queen's Own Rifles and became a decorated hero and earned the nickname Baseplate Benny. Dr. Jack Markowitz of Toronto was a famous doctor, surgeon, and researcher in Toronto, but Canada's Army wouldn't take him because he hadn't been naturalized yet, although he always felt it was because he was a Jew who had been born in Romania. Marco went to London to sign up with British intelligence. Later, he served with the British as an army doctor in Singapore until he was captured by the Japanese. Marco spent 3 years in Japanese hands, in slave labor camps, in primitive jungle conditions, caring for the other prisoners who were building a road and bridge. He did hundreds of amputations. He was tortured, and when the war ended, he was decorated with a British Empire Medal. He would never forgive Canada for not letting him serve. He suffered from what we now know was PTSD. Some of the other more well-known Canadian Jews who served included Monty Hall, a game show host originally from Winnipeg. He was turned down by the Tank Corps because, "I don't think they're taking Jews," he was told. He served later in the entertainment units around Manitoba. Comedians Johnny Wayne and Frank Schuster were already famous for their radio shows. They dodged bullets and bombs to put on shows for the exhausted men in caves off the beaches of Normandy in the summer right after D-Day. The director of Love Story, Arthur Hiller, served as a navigator in the RCAF, and Robert Mirvish, the brother of entrepreneur Ed Mirvish, served in the U.S. forces. Comedian David Steinberg's oldest brother, Jaime, quit his job as a Winnipeg sports reporter to join the RCAF at 17 and a half. He bugged his parents and bugged them to allow him to join up, even underage. Senator David Kroll, the former two-time mayor of Windsor, saw action overseas, as did Barney Danson, a Toronto-based cabinet minister. He lost an eye in action and 3 of his best friends. There were athletes, too, including Harry Campbell, a lacrosse player from the Montreal Maroons, Mitch Peckett of Coobar, Saskatchewan with the New York Rangers farm team, and Mo Hurwitz, a Montreal hockey player who turned down a tryout with the Boston Bruins because, "How can I play hockey when millions of my brothers are being killed?" he said. It wasn't only famous Jewish families whose sons and daughters served. Truck drivers, tailors, fruit peddlers, shippers, dry cleaners, farmers, dentists, doctors, and lawyers. Jeweler Gerald Levinston was in charge of feeding and equipping the Canadian Army as they marched from Normandy to Berlin. Later, he was put in charge of taking the German surrender in May 1945. His general told him, "I want a Jew to tell those bastards what to do." Even the sons of rabbis did their duty, especially the 7 sons of the Mazer family of Ottawa. In fact, 16 rabbis served as chaplains. Some went overseas to minister to the men of their own faith and then help rebuild European Jewry once the war ended and the camps were liberated. Canada's women pitched in too, both at home fundraising and sending comfort packages full of cigarettes and kosher salamis to the men overseas, while about 270 Jewish women served in uniform, including Rose Goodman of New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, who served as an adjutant at an Air Force base south of Calgary, and Daisy Lazar of Quebec City, a military police officer stationed in Ottawa. Mimi Friedman of Montreal spoke 5 languages, drove an ambulance in London, England during the Blitz, and was the only Canadian Jewish woman in uniform decorated for bravery, winning a mention in dispatches. Nearly 450 Canadian Jews paid the ultimate price during World War II. While some are buried in carefully maintained war cemeteries around the world, including in Hong Kong, Juno Beach, Italy, Germany, and Holland, others have no known grave. Their bodies were never found to bury. So their names are on memorials across the country, like this one here at the Mount Sinai Cemetery in Toronto, which the Royal Canadian Legion Wingate branch raised the money for to erect an evocative sculpture. It has the names of those Jews who fought and died not in just the Second World War, but also the First World War in battles of Vimy and the Somme and Passchendaele and Korea. A monument like this also sits in Montreal's Baron de Hirsch Cemetery. It has 579 names and is lovingly curated by Larry Rosenthal in honor of his brother Willie Velvel Rosenthal, a gunner who was killed in Italy in 1943. Willie was a journalist, and one of his letters home, published in the local YMHA newspaper, reminds us what our veterans fought for all those years ago so we could live in freedom. For the dead shall not have fallen in vain, not in a world where our holy sanctuaries are safe and unmolested, in a world where organizations, institutions of culture and learning and education are respected and upheld and supported. No price is too great to pay, no life too precious to enforce our beliefs and ideals, he wrote. That veterans' message rings true even more today, as we live in a world with widespread anti-Semitism, record levels of anti-Semitic incidents according to B'nai B'rith and Canadian police figures, but also other forms of intolerance and hatred, anti-black racism, Islamophobia, and more. And as one of our veterans who just died a few days ago, Harry Hurwitz, asked us to do in his dying wish, is to honor our veterans. And you can do that by remembering that remembrance is not just to wear a poppy a few days a year or to stand at a moment of silence on Remembrance Day. Make remembrance an active verb. If you see intolerance, say something, do something, march, educate, call it out. Remember is an active verb.
We have a few comments from perhaps the only living survivor at the time that this video was taken, Harry Hurwitz. Harry was a survivor from the sinking of the HMCS Athabasca, which was sunk during the Second World War.
My name is Harry Hurwitz. I was in the Athabasca when it was torpedoed twice. I'm happy to be alive, and I feel very sorry for the men who went down with the ship. Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, we talked about Harry Hurwitz, who being the survivor of the HMCS Athabasca, and perhaps Harry unfortunately just passed away a couple of weeks ago. But as I said, he and all his brothers served in the armed forces. Mo Hurwitz was his brother, who was awarded the Military Medal for extraordinary heroism and leadership in his first action in France. During the battle for the Falaise Road, Reginald Boy of the Canadian War Museum described it as one of the most swiftly successful troop actions by Canadian tanks in the entire Normandy campaign. Mo was second in command of 4 Troop, and although missing one of its usual 4 Sherman tanks and without infantry support, the group of 15 grenadiers assaulted the flank of the main enemy defensive position in front of the village of Sintho. In over 10 minutes, they destroyed 11 German anti-tank guns, including 6 88s, and forced 2 others to withdraw. The grenadiers also killed at least 15 Germans, captured 31 others, and opened a kilometer-wide gap in the German front against the loss of only 1 guardsman killed and 1 wounded. When Hurwitz was in command of Troop 4, he assisted by 3 anti-tank Crusader tanks, and C Company of the Algonquin Regiment seized the railway station at Philippine in the Netherlands, thus sealing off German forces in the pocket. And that morning, again with the lack of infantry support, Hurwitz dismounted and undertook the actions that earned him the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the second highest award that a non-commissioned member could earn at the time. Armed only with a pistol and accompanied by 2 guardsmen, Hurwitz personally attacked 2 German machine guns and captured 25 enemy soldiers. He later helped knock out another 88mm anti-tank gun. In all, the force took 150 prisoners at Philippine. Unfortunately, Hurwitz, in another action when his tank was damaged and no possible ability to withdraw, while disembarking from his tank, was shot by a sniper and died the next day. There is a tribute to Mo Hurwitz by the Canadian Grenadier Guards, awarding the Mo Hurwitz Award to the most outstanding member of the regiment to this day.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ed Fitch. My service in the Canadian Armed Forces was over a 43-year period. I retired in 2009 in the rank of Major General. I feel deeply the privilege and the responsibility of addressing you this Remembrance Day, 75 years after the end of World War II, as we honor the Jewish War Veterans of Canada. I'm also a member of the National Board of CJA. I extend to you greetings, gratitude, and good wishes on behalf of the CJA Board and staff. Throughout my military career, my role models were the Jewish war veterans of World War II, including my father, my uncle, and many of their friends who I came to know as I was growing up. If I've been able to reach some height, it is because I was standing on the shoulders of these giants. Let me provide some context. In the 1930s, the permanent force establishment of the Canadian Army was 10,000. However, actual strength remained around 4,000. Yet by 1945, Canada put 1.1 million men and women into uniform for the war effort, out of an overall population of 11 million. As many as 20,000 of that 1.1 million, were Jewish men and women, or something just less than 2% of the total Canadian forces. In 1941, there were about 175,000 Jews in Canada, or 1.6% of the total Canadian population. Thus, Canadian Jews volunteered well in excess of their percentage of Canada's overall population. Of those 1.1 million Canadian veterans, about 32,000 are alive today. If the percentages hold true, then only about 600 of that great generation of Jewish veterans are with us yet, and their average age is over 92. The Jewish War Veterans of Canada served these thousands of Jewish veterans for so many years. From posts across Canada, they helped each other in the transition back to peacetime while providing each other that vital contact with the few who could understand what they had experienced. They organized community events, annual dinners, aided veterans, wrote histories, and gave generous gifts out of their own gratitude to have served and survived. One of their great efforts was contributing to the epic Canadian Jewish War Memorial Book of Remembrance, which lists Jewish volunteers, casualties, and prisoners of war from the South African War at the turn of the 20th century through World Wars I, World War II, Korea, and on peacekeeping missions. Their service has recently been recognized through Ellen Bessner's great book, Double Threat. At a Jewish war veteran annual Remembrance Day dinner in Calgary around year 2000, I was honored to be invited as a guest of the inimitable Calgary Post Commander Val Reimer, Zichrono Livracha. The hall was well filled with 3 generations of Jewish war veterans and their families. Yet Val turned to me to lament the small numbers. In response, I asked Val if it was better to live in a country where the veterans are diminishing in number due to old age, or to live in a country where the ranks of veterans are replenished every generation. He allowed, as I had a good point, and we enjoyed a wonderful dinner. Let me now address the veterans directly. You helped defeat Hitler. You helped each other. You helped your communities. You raised monuments, and you wrote books. You will be remembered. On this Remembrance Day, look back with pride and satisfaction. Look forward, knowing that your legacy is assured. God bless.
I'd also like to talk about the exploits of Sidney Shulamson, not very well-known individual except by many of his colleagues and people in the RCAF. Sidney Shulamson enlisted in 1939 when the war broke out. In 1942, he was posted to an RCAF squadron in Scotland, which flew Beaufighter dive bomber aircraft. They were a slow lumbering aircraft, not designed really for dogfighting, but for dive bombing. And their objective was to attack enemy shipping in the North Atlantic. Well, the British developed rockets, and unfortunately, they were not really trained well to fire these rockets, and the Beaufighter squadrons were taking a lot of casualties and not being very effective. But with the support of his squadron leader, Sidney Shulamson, developed aerial tactics for attacking shipping in terms of angles of attack, timing of release of bombs and cannon and rockets, etc. As a result, the improvement of the squadrons was phenomenal. They were sinking enemy shipping all over the place, and this attracted the attention of the senior Air Force people in the RAF and the RCAF. Shulamson pioneered rocket attacks on enemy shipping in the North Atlantic, which wound up inflicting damage on the enemy convoys. He himself flew 50 missions and sank 12 ships and aided in the sinking of several other ships as well, and shot down a few enemy aircraft in his service. One of the other things that he did was engage an enemy Messerschmitt fighter plane when one of his wingmen were damaged, so that the wingman could escape back to Scotland. And he had to engage this enemy fighter for about 18 minutes before the German aircraft pilot saluted him, because he was probably going to run out of fuel and not be able to return to his base and break off the engagement. For this incident, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He also was awarded the Distinguished Service Order because of his development of pioneering the rocket attacks on the enemy shipping. Shullinson also led large flights of attacks on enemy shipping for quite a while, but eventually the senior command grounded him because he was just too valuable as a trainer to lose in the event that he was shot down. So he wound up being only a flying officer, never promoted, and but one of the most valuable pilots that there was during the Second World War. Certainly we should not forget to talk about Ben Dunkelman. Ben Dunkelman, as you heard from Ellen Bessner, attempted to join the Navy, was refused, and wound up joining the Queen's Own Rifles. Ben Dunkelman landed on D-Day in the second wave. He was reputed to be the only officer that landed on D-Day that was still effectively fighting with the Queen's Own Rifles when the war ended. Shortly after the advance by the Canadians on D-Day, the Canadians were going to get some relief, and Dunkelman and his driver went out to do a reconnaissance. As a result of the reconnaissance, they spotted something in the field that was a little unnatural, and as Dunkelman looked around, he saw a number of haystacks where he did not think the haystacks should have been. This raised his curiosity, and he called for an artillery bombardment of that area. The following day, they found 14 tanks had been destroyed under the haystacks, and roughly 2,000 enemy troops had perished under the artillery attack, which was aimed right at the Canadians at the time. So in many ways he prevented this counterattack from being successful and saved the lives of perhaps many Canadians. He also took part in the battle at Caen, Falaise, and in the Hochwald Forest, where he personally, in hand-to-hand combat, was able to, in personally hand-to-hand combat, did eliminate several of the enemy troops. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his service in the Hochwald campaign, and he played a key role in taking the steep walled ridge in the dark forests of the Hochwald. After the war, he was offered command of the Queen's Own Rifles, but went back to business, in the family business, and that was basically the end of his career with the Canadian military, although he did offer to go fight in the War of Independence in Israel, where he commanded a brigade in the north. Ben was one of the most decorated Canadian soldiers as well. After the war, he was offered command of the Queen's Own Rifles, but declined owing to business interests at home. He returned to Canada, but then decided to travel the war, this time to fight for Israel in the spring of 1948, where he commanded the troops in the north and captured many areas in northern Israel at the time. Following his return to Canada, he and his wife operated several successful businesses.
Today, on Remembrance Day, we are remembering the contributions of all those who have served in the Canadian military, and particularly those today in this ceremony of the Jewish faith. I'd be remiss in not telling an anecdote about part of our Jewish history and Jewish contribution to Canada that involves my own organization that I'm honored to lead today, B'nai B'rith. In 1942, at the height of World War II, the Air Cadets came to the Toronto Lodge of B'nai B'rith at that time and approached us about a Commonwealth air training scheme. They stated that they needed more pilots, and they were looking to enlist 200 young men of pre-enlistment age who could be trained up as pilots and go off and fight the Nazis and become pilots for Canada. At that time, however, there were discriminatory regulations including the fact that if you were born to immigrant parents or you were a person of color, you were not permitted to fly for this country. When B'nai B'rith was approached, we said, no, we will not form an air cadet squadron unless and until those regulations are changed. Those regs were changed in short order, and history was changed as a result. 200 young men were recruited and trained by B'nai B'rith, and they ended up forming a B'nai B'rith Air Cadet Squadron based out of Toronto. And of those recruits, which was non-denominational, it was a non-denominational Air Cadet Squadron, 70% were Jewish, 30% were non-Jewish. And what's incredible is that the senior non-commissioned officer of the B'nai B'rith Air Cadet Squadron was black. And of all of those recruits that went off, all of those pilots, many of them fighting against the Nazis, some of them went on to have careers as pilots as a result of those discriminatory regulations being changed.
Kolot baleva penima nefesh Yehudi homia ufade mizrach kadima Ein Letzion Sophia Olovda Tikvatenu Hatikva Bachnod Alpayim Leotam Hoshi Be'atzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Leotam Hoshi Be'atzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim